So my name's David Fudge. I'm currently a freelance web developer working exclusively with Meteor, and I'm going to talk about Meteor with React, using React with Meteor, and why I kind of made the jump from Blaze to React. Can everyone hear me okay, or do I need a mic? I'm going to say that's good.
If you do want the mic,
I'm good. If you can't hear me, just shout it out and I'll speak louder or grab the mic or something. So that's how you can reach me. If any of this is interesting to you, I'm going to have it up at the end as well. This is my first time using Keynote, so hopefully it all goes well too. So who am I? Like I said, I've been a programmer, or I am a freelance Meteor developer, web/mobile/whatever developer. And I've been a programmer for about 20 years. I started with, basic HTML, and I made my basic centered website with a dancing baby on it and blink tags everywhere, and kind of moved into JavaScript, into Flash, PHP, got more advanced as the years went on, and now I'm back to JavaScript with the whole explosion of JavaScript frameworks that allow you to do a lot of really cool stuff. I've worked freelance, obviously. I've worked in small shops as like the 10th or 11th employee and built that company up. And I've also worked in corporate environments like Nortel and Air Miles. So, the first question that I'm going to pose, can you guys see this okay? I know I'm kind of standing in front of it for some of you, is what's wrong with Blaze, right? Has anyone not used Blaze? Nobody. Okay, just me then. Okay, so essentially what's wrong with Blaze? Nothing. Blaze is perfectly fine as a templating platform or language, and you can go ahead using it. I was using it for a while, and there's nothing wrong with it. Personally, I like React, and I'm going to get into that. So, why did Blaze and I break up? So, I'm going to kind of take you through a little bit of a story that maybe you can relate to. Have you guys been programming for a long time? Are you fairly new at it? A year? Anyone? 5 years? A few people. Okay. So, what I got into when I was using Blaze, and granted I was a little bit new at Meteor at the time, but what I would get into is this kind of thing, where I'd change something small, or what I thought was small, and then all of a sudden something over here wasn't working. And this kind of happened, my head in my hands, why isn't it working? Have to go through a bunch of debugging and figure in to try and find out what's going on. And then I get to this point where I just want to flip over my desk, right? And, go be a musician instead of being a developer anymore. Which I am, by the way. I'm a professional musician as well as being a professional coder. That's my band. New album coming out soon. But I digress. So, earlier this year, I decided I was going to take a look at React. I heard a lot of buzz about it in JavaScript Weekly, on Twitter, and just wherever I was looking, I saw Facebook React, React, and all this stuff. So I thought I'd look at it. And this happened. Which, has anyone looked at React? 1, 2, 3. Probably this was your reaction too when you first saw it. Well, at first, that's what I looked like, literally going, oh, that's, it hurt my eyes and my sensibilities. So I thought, I left it for a while because I was just like, that's too crazy. It doesn't make any sense. I don't like it. you're supposed to separate your CSS and your JavaScript and your HTML, keep it all separate, right? Because that's your separation of concerns. So a few months later, I was working on a boring marketing project like we were talking about earlier for sponge towels. And, they wanted a pretty simple site. And I thought, okay, it's easy. I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of learn React. Because I really, still all this buzz. I want to learn it. So I figured I'd take something easy. And so I watched the React Comp video, and it got me excited about it. And I moved on and tried it out. And then I thought, after actually using it, it's like, maybe it's not so bad, right? And I thought it was cool, and I've used Require.js and Backbone, and I've built stuff around that. So using modules with React. Now this was not in Meteor. This was just React by itself, packaged with Browserify and using NPM modules and whatever. But the module system was really cool. It was kind of like Backbone and Require, but better. Well, not as confusing. So then I thought, okay, I got this app here that's not really working that I built with Backbone, and why not try and port it, right? And that experience of porting this app changed everything. And now I was like, yes, I get it. This is what I'm going to do from now on, because it just, you work towards something and you're not getting it, but you're kind of getting it, and then you cross that threshold and the sky opens up, right? I don't know if any of you have driven across Canada, but as you drive through Northern Ontario and you get to the Manitoba border, as you're driving through Ontario, there's trees and trees and trees everywhere. Everywhere there's trees. And then it's like you hit the Manitoba border and there's no trees, and the sky goes like this. And all of a sudden you can see everything around you like this, and that's kind of what it felt like when I was able to wrap my head around React and JSX and how everything kind of fit together and how easy it was and how it made sense. So back to Meteor. Why did I break up with Blaze? Well, one of the big things for me was the jQuery soup that I would get lost in. As you guys probably know, when you're binding events, when you're binding your helpers or whatever you're doing with your Blaze templates, you're using it in a jQuery fashion, right? So you have to use your selectors, and you add a function to it, and then stuff happens when you click a button or a div, or you mouse over something, or submit a form. Stuff happens. And I never really liked jQuery to begin with, but I learned it because I had to. And this kind of thing was always my problem with jQuery. And then another thing that really got me as I started doing more complex things with Meteor was the data context, even between my helpers, my template helpers, events, and the rendered function, right? Like I was trying to use jQuery plugins, and then I'd have my data context and my rendered callback, and I couldn't get that data up to my helpers easily. And I found that a lot of the time I was using things like the session for things that shouldn't go in the session. And that always really bugged me. So those were two of the biggest things. And then this one was another one, having all kinds of files split all over the place. I'll try and move around a little bit up here for you guys so some people can see. Yeah, I'm tethered to my computer. Sorry. Hold on. No, there's lots of slack. Here, I'll do this. So this kind of thing where I have two files, or at least two files for every template that I had, also was something that bugged me just from an organization standpoint, I'm not really the most organized person, but when I'm coding, and especially when I go to look at somebody else's code, I really want it to be organized so I don't have to mess around trying to find stuff later. And on the left, I have, a tree from one of my Meteor React applications right now that, one file for each component, and not template, they're essentially the same thing, but they call them components in React. So one file for each thing, and I tried to label it with what it does, right? And I really like that from an organizational standpoint. It's really clean, and it helps me understand my own apps better, let alone, the next guy is going to have to look at them. So another really cool thing is I'm not tied to jQuery when I use React. I can use it if I want to, but in one project I'm working on right now, actually, I don't even have jQuery installed. Like, it's not added to my project at all. I took it out, and it's kind of liberating, actually, because a lot of the things that I was using jQuery for, I don't need, right? Like submitting forms or adding events to buttons and such, because I can add them right on the element with an on-click action. So on-click, do this. And then my function for it, and I'll show you that later, but if there's time, I'll show you. Basically, my functions, this one, like this.dismiss and this.delete, those functions live in that JSX file. And they're just defined as a function. You click your button, it goes to that function and runs this. Like, it really couldn't be easier. So these are the kind of things that pushed me towards using React instead of Blaze for my Meteor development. And then time is money. And I found that when I went to port my app from Blaze templates to React components, it took me about 3 days worth of work to rewrite the entire code base. And it had been something that I'd been working on with someone else for about 2 months at that point. Now, rewriting stuff is not that big a deal, but it was a lot of code. There's thousands of lines of code and many, many, many files. And we were able to compress the amount of files, and we were able to throw some code out because it just wasn't needed anymore. So it was super cool. And so what else is going on? I don't know how up to date everyone is on what's going on in Meteor right now. Hopefully you're really up to date because you're here. You're enthusiastic about it. But Meteor 1.2 officially supports React. I'm using it in a native app, or Cordova app, that I'm building right now. And there's things like Flow Router instead of Iron Router. That's my opinion. I think it's a better workflow. I think it's easier to wrap my head around what's going on. And the React layout package that Kadira has put out is just, it's awesome. It takes care of a lot of the layout stuff that I was doing manually and putting triggers in to kind of make them happen before and after my components were loaded into the DOM. And yeah, there's lots of articles if you want to look up more about React and Meteor and React versus Blaze and all of that. Just type it in, React versus Blaze, you'll get a whole bunch of stuff that talks about the differences between the two, why, the author's opinion about why one is better than the other, and there's lots of them that talk about performance as well. And this tweet was actually pretty funny to me because when Facebook initially open sourced React, everyone kind of did the oh god when they looked at it and said this is no good, right? The whole separation of concerns business. And what they tried to impress upon the audience at the time, and then every time after that, is that the separation of concerns is more about the concern being each component or template, right? As opposed to technologies, which is your HTML, your JavaScript, your CSS. So if you have a component, the React way is inside your component. Anything that you need for that component is in that file, in that component. So that when you change something in there, it only affects that component and cannot affect something else. And that idea is the separation of concerns, right? So anything concerning that component is in there. You know, if you can still use style sheets and whatever, class names, but they're moving toward or back toward inline styles using JavaScript, which is an interesting idea. That's a whole other talk, but it's an interesting idea that you can have your JavaScript styling the component, and then also any functionality that's within your component, like your button click actions or your form submits, are in that component file as well. It makes it really easy to track down bugs, really easy to develop new components to plug them into stuff, because they're all encapsulated, right? You just drag and drop basically, or code and drop, I guess. And if it fits, it fits, and if it doesn't, then the only thing you've broken is your component. The funny thing about Ben Allman here is he has a comment on his own tweet, because someone tweeted a few months later saying, "Do you still feel this way?" And he says, "Actually, no, I'm really excited to try React now." He's really excited to try React. He hasn't had a chance, but he's excited about it now because he gets it, right? And this was funny because they're rethinking established best practices, which is true. But the way that they're doing it is, you know, intriguing, and it seems, I don't want to say right, but it feels right. It feels good, the way that they're putting it forward. So here's 3 blog articles that I think really help to understand what React is trying to do. The first one doesn't really talk about Meteor, but it talks about React as a whole and how it fits into development. And if you Google these titles, you'll see the blogs come up right away. They're pretty well read. And like I can give this deck to Paul to put up with the video or whatever you need, so that you can find them later. And that's it. Thanks. So if anyone has any questions, I can try to answer them. Or if not, I'm going to have some pizza. Yeah?
Are you using the design pattern where you test React pass data?
Right, so the question is, am I using a design pattern, basically parent-child, right, to have data and a parent that passes down data to its children instead of children making calls to the data sources? Yes and no. I've found it to be a little bit problematic, and it's probably just because I'm not doing it right, using subscriptions and trying to get, I mean, you know, I'll make a subscription to my Meteor collection, and then, you know, I can loop through the data in it to create, you know, a list or whatever it is that I'm creating out of that. And I'll pass the data as props to that, so that each one is showing its different set of data, like it's each document. But you know, the more complex data that you would use to render something on the screen, I'm not really doing it. So I guess the answer is half and half. Yes and no. I'd like to do it, and I have to get more into it, but paying work is kind of getting in the way. Yeah.
What router are you using?
The question is, what router am I using? I'm using Flow Router. Like I said a little bit ago, I think it's a better router. Just for me, I like it better. I think it's easy to wrap my head around what's happening, and it does its one job and then gets out of the way, which I really like. A lot of people use React Router with React apps, and I don't like React Router at all. So I like Flow Router better. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. Thanks for repeating the questions. I can tell you watch the dev shops.
Yeah, I hate when people don't say the questions back.
By the way, I'm sure a lot of people have seen it. You mentioned the key difference is that React allows you to work at a component level. So how do you handle things like client-side globals, like session variables using React?
So the question is, how do I handle session variables or global variables with React? Mostly I try to not have them. I mean, I haven't used the session keyword at all in any of my React Meteor apps. And basically, the data context within my component is only concerned with whatever it's doing, right? So I'm not, if I have a list item or something that I click on it and it takes me to another route to show a profile or something, that button click would just, let me think about this for a second. Button click would take whatever the profile ID is that it's been passed, and then fire a router call, take it to the next route, and then it gets the data again and displays for that component. It would pass whatever data that component for your profile view needs, and then it would just display it. And that's kind of the idea with the parent-child data processing or data hierarchy as well.
In that case, you have like different pages and you go from one page to another, you need like a same state or the first page. When you go back, when you want to like reload it all from scratch, you need to like save variables in the session. Is there a possibility to use them?
Absolutely. The question is, let me see if I can paraphrase. Question is, if I have to go back and forth between views, how do I save the state of the previous view?
Yeah.
So you can use the session variables if you want to. There's nothing stopping you from using session. Anything you can do in Blaze, you can do in React, and more or less vice versa. With the design patterns being accepted. As far as saving state, something that Aaron Oda from Meteor Hacks, Kadira, has talked about it, is trying to use the URL as your state instead of putting stuff in the session. So I've been trying to go more towards that. Obviously, if you have a bunch of stuff going on that you need to save, the state that hasn't been saved or something, like if you have a profile page that you're editing a bunch of stuff, and then if they nav away and come back, you want it to be there like that, then yeah, you're going to probably have to store some stuff in session. But I mean, for me, and what I would sell to a client in that situation is either, if you edit a field and get out of it, it saves it. You toggle a button, it saves it, or you go down, you have to press a save button, and if you don't press your save button, it doesn't save your changes. So if you go back and you come back, it's expected behavior that none of the things that you did not save are there. Again, that's my opinion and my view. Is there, yeah?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when you have a form that you're filling out and you click submit, so you have the on click for the submit, how are you getting the data from the whole form without using jQuery or?
It's a good question. So the question is, without using jQuery, how do I get data out of a form when you hit submit? So there's a couple of ways. You can use jQuery if you want to. Also, React has a ref property, and you can use this.refs. Whatever you named your tag, like on your form tag, you could call it ref equals my form. And then you go this.refs.myform, and then you can access all of the stuff that's in that tag.
Question.
Yeah, sorry.
Just now you mentioned about inline CSS
Yep.
as a styling for the component. How would you handle the SAS or less style sheets?
Well, Meteor has packages to handle SAS and less, right? Currently, I use some less style sheets, so I'm still doing that. As far as using it with inline styles, you wouldn't. The inline styles are put into React as JavaScript objects, right? So instead of writing your styles in CSS or CSS precompiler or whatever, you would write it as a JavaScript object or a bunch of JavaScript objects that you could then concatenate together, and then you throw it in your component like that. Anything you would need to do, like transforms or whatever, you would then write as a JavaScript function. So if you had background color as a property in your style object, then that could be a function that returns whatever you need it to be. And that function could then be based on whatever you want. It could do some crazy math, or it could just return number FFF. Whatever you want. It's really cool, actually. I started doing some more of it, and again, it was the whole driving through the prairies and the sky opens up when I kind of wrap my head around. This is interesting.
If the marketing department comes along and says, we want a total restyle of the whole site, it sounds like a
Well, then you flip over the table and you tell them I'm going to go be a musician. Get someone else to do it. I made it look nice for the next guy. Yeah.
So you talked about you were using Blade before.
Yep.
Did you experience any obstacles in Blade that you couldn't resolve, that you could resolve with React?
Obstacles that I couldn't resolve. Okay, so the question is, when I was using Blaze, did I experience any obstacles that I couldn't resolve that pushed me toward React?
Yeah.
Not really. There was things that I had to kind of rack my brain for and figure out a way to do it and go on Stack Overflow or troll the message boards for an answer to. But, excuse me, nothing that couldn't be resolved. Moving away from Blaze to React had nothing to do with something I couldn't do in Blaze. Yeah.
It's a totally unfair question and super hard to answer, but I'm just curious. So if Iron Router and CoffeeScript are really comfortable and familiar for people with a Rails background, is there anything that you would kind of say is similar for the combination of Flow Router and React? A language, or framework, or a style that did anything that you've learned in the past help you learn React better?
Okay. So the question is, for someone coming from a Rails background and who is using CoffeeScript and Iron Router, is there an easy transition to using Flow Router and React? Am I kind of getting that right?
Let me rephrase.
Okay.
Is there anything you did in your past that helped you pick up React?
Is there anything I did in the past that helped me pick up React? That's a good question. That's a long pass to kind of think through in a couple of seconds. I'm sure there has been. I did not ever use Rails. I came from PHP and MySQL and ActionScript and that kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that because.
Yeah, open question. I don't know. Like that seems like that there's a. What were you going to?
Yeah, because in terms of React, the whole thing in React is basically life cycles.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. So if you're familiar with servlet, like with some of the Java and EE systems, like Servlet and JSP, because the main thing in there is lifecycle stuff. So if you actually work with Servlet or JSP, you will have a pretty good grasp in terms of that, and custom tags and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So I guess that answer for everyone watching at home, you. Basically, if you come from a Java or JSP background, you'll understand the life cycle of React components better, or you might be able to understand it more and be more comfortable with it, and that would help you pick it up. That's one thing I didn't touch on is the life cycle, but it is very important, the life cycle in React, and I won't go into it, but basically your component is mounted, and there's a bunch of callbacks or a bunch of functions that you can invoke code on when, wow, that's quieter now. When a component is about to be loaded or mounted, when it has been mounted into the DOM, when it's about to be unmounted, when the state is going to change, when the state has changed. There's a whole bunch of lifecycle functions that you can run code on, and the React docs have tons of information on it. They're actually really good. So if you're going to be using React, I suggest you make a bookmark, because I Google it every time, and it's such a pain in the ass, and I keep thinking I gotta bookmark this, and I never do. So bookmark the React docs for component lifecycle, and that'll go a long way to helping you learn it and be comfortable. That's it. I wore you guys out then. Awesome. Paul.
My question was a serious one about the CSS embedded in the code. If you're expected to do a restyle of the site and like hand it over to a designer,
Yeah.
how do they interact with this scattered CSS?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be scattered. The question is, how do you work with scattered or inline CSS if you have to do a major overhaul of the design?
Yeah. Well, how, if you want skins on your site, so you can switch from one to the next.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
on your mobile app.
Material UI is, I guess, a React component styling framework.
It's from Google, isn't it?
Material design is from Google, yeah, but there's a framework. I don't know if it's framework or platform or library, probably is the best term for it, called Material UI. And this group of developers has created these React components that use the styling to make it look like material design. With, you put a drawer, you put a button or whatever, and it uses material design. And they've put skins in.
Okay.
And so you could kind of do the same thing if you had, if you had a centralized, or not central, but if you had a skin JS file,
Right.
say, and you put your styles in there, you're kind of getting into using CSS again, but they get added in line. So I guess the bonus with that is when you're doing it in line, you can pick and choose which elements you want to have which types of styles. I mean, it kind of sounds like 6 in one, half a dozen the other, right? And I haven't worked with it enough to really give a concrete answer about why you should use one over the other, but you could essentially have different skin JS files because you're going to have the same properties on your objects, your style objects that you're throwing on a component. So because it's named the same, you can have the same name over here and have the background be white, and then you just swap out the skin, or you tell your app to use a different skin file or variable or whatever, and then the background can be black or red or blue or whatever you want, right?
It just sounds rather like if you want to go for React, you have to give up on Sass and let it.
Not at all.
No?
Not at all. You don't have to use any inline styles. It is not a requirement. It's something that Facebook is kind of trying to open people's minds to, I think, because React Native relies on it and uses it heavily. And their whole thing about learn once, write anywhere is where they're trying to push things. So you learn how to use React, and then you can build a web app. You can build a Cordova app if you're using something like Meteor, or you can use React Native and build a native app with their JavaScript framework over there that they rely on the JavaScript inline styles. Again, that's my thoughts on it. That's my JavaScript 2030.
I'll just chime in. I read something about this too, and if you look at it from Facebook's point of view, they would say, what fresh hell is CSS? Like Bootstrap has 600 global variables in it, right? In JavaScript, everybody would just cry and go home. But everybody lives with it in CSS. But if you build these enterprise level apps, and you're like, well, why can't I just do granular styling and knowing that it's not going to have any cascading or unforeseen effect, right? So they're kind of at that deep level of doing it. They're sort of saying, we want everything to be truly atomic, even styles. But you can still use any of these frameworks with React.
Yeah.
They don't have to change your workflow with CSS if you want to be able to handle it, hand it over to just a regular designer or whatever. But if you're going deep into this and you're kind of trying to leave all the ugliness of CSS behind, because it's not truly object-oriented, it's more so with a compiler, but really it's out of the box, it's kind of crap that way, right? So that's their thing. 600 global variables, do we really want that, And
I mean, they talk about less and CSS, you have function, or SAS, not CSS, less and SAS. You have your functions that you can use to darken or lighten or, whatever you want to do with it. Why not just use JavaScript straight, right? Because it's so much more powerful to just do it straight with the language that's actually doing the work anyway, right? Yeah.
Do you have a brief example you can show us with some do you have
Live coding?
Yeah. I don't know if you have something handy.
I can show some code that I'm working on. It might be interesting or useful. Yeah. Totally. Let's see. This one's kind of ugly. How about we look at this? Okay. I'm going to have to turn around here because I only have it on the one screen. So this is some code for... Pardon me? Yes. Is it Command Plus? How do I do this now? Anyone use WebStorm and know how to do that? No? Maybe Shift Command? No. Okay, so I'll show you this app too, because it might make more sense if I'm actually showing you what I'm doing. Okay. Sweet, right? Whoops. So it's just building my app right now. And it's a little bit slow because I'm using 1.2 RC12, I think. And so this one I'm using the Material UI library. This is so weird. I'm used to having my other monitor right here, not over there, so it's kind of messing me up a little bit. So, let me see if I can, I'll pull up my login screen here. So this is my login screen, and here are my lifecycle functions that we were talking about earlier. So when it mounts or updates, I'm calling this .route to kind of take care of my login business, my actual logging into the app. So it's checking for a user ID and throwing me to my authorized route that takes me through if I'm authorized. And if not, then it has my render function here, and this is my component for displaying the login screen that I should be able to show you now. There you go. Don't worry about this. I was messing around with RabbitMQ last night, which is really cool, by the way, if anyone wants to get into that. RabbitMQ. It's a messaging service, I guess, or system. Or anyway, ignore that. The idea of this app is that you log in. It's for actors who need to submit auditions. And apparently what a lot of people in Hollywood are doing these days is they set up their iPhone across the room and they take a video of themselves reading a part for an audition, and then they upload it to Vimeo or Dropbox or something and then email it to their agent. And agents hate this. Like, they love that they're getting videos, but they're in all kinds of different formats or whatever. So the idea behind this is you upload it here and then everything's in one format, one place kind of thing, and it's all secure. So anyway, I can log in with Google, and it's going to look at my name and try to import my data from IMDb, or TMDB is what we're using, because IMDb doesn't have an API apparently. And if it doesn't have anything, it's going to say, can't find anything here. That should have a line there. Again, this is super low budge right now. It's like the first couple of weeks of development. I haven't actually touched it for like a month because I got busy with other stuff. So I can go in here and I can search for Jack. Say, I'm Jack Nicholson and I don't have my real name on my Google Plus account. I'm using, Flash Lightning or something, and so of course it didn't find that, right? So it goes here, no, I'm not Jack Black. Hey, there I am, but I don't want to be Jack Nicholson. I'm going to search for Courtney, right? And it pulls in a bunch of people and the photos, so I look for myself and then I can import, right? Or, and I was messing around with this earlier, I want to be Brad Pitt. I mean, who doesn't, right? So I can actually, instead of typing a name, I can put my IMDb profile ID in here, and it'll go out, reach out. There I am, good looking dude. I can import my data, and then there it is. It grabs it all from an API and shows you this ugly screen right now because I haven't bothered to style anything. So this is my login screen here. I have my buttons, and here's some inline styling, right? Background color, and I just set up some variables to make it easy on myself, right? And then I have my labels for the buttons and my actions. And Material UI library tells you to use on touch tap instead of on click. That's the only difference there. Each one of them is just calling my login function. And then I have a simple sign in here with email and password. So this is all that this component does, right? And then my login function is here. So I'm doing a switch to see which button I pressed. And then I'm throwing it to, right, do a switch, I fire a login, and then I'm through. So when I go through, if I have nothing in there, I go to this debut route, which throws up this stuff. And so when you're using React in Meteor, in React you have this get initial state function, which the state is basically any data that's going to change in your component. When you change the state, your component will refresh and it'll redisplay. It'll diff what you're trying to tell it to do with what's already on the screen, and it'll change anything that needs to be changed and re-render your component. So anything in your state, you go this.setState, give it a property. If it's already in the state, it'll overwrite it. If it's not, it'll add it to the state. And then it'll try to re-render your component. In Meteor, they've added this getMeteor data, which is like getInitialState. Anything that changes in getMeteor data will also try to re-render your component. The special thing with getMeteor data is it's for reactive variables, reactive data. So any subscriptions, any reactive var, reactive dict data. You could even put your session in here because it would be reactive, right? So if I add user equal to session.getUser or something, you know, and the user changed in my session, then it would re-render this component because I've got it in my getMeteor data function. It's relying on that reactive data. So when the reactive data changes, it's like using your tracker auto run, right? Same idea. Anything in this object is available in your component with this.data. So this.data.user or this.data.imdb config, tmdb config. And so here's a bunch of things. It's the normal kind of things you would see in helper functions, all right? Or in events. This one would be an event function, right? You know, I'm doing Meteor call, and I'm using the flashy ES 2015 stuff, and here's my set state business, which, you know, if anything changes, it's going to re-render my component, and so on and so forth. This would be a helper function, and then here are some sub-components inside this component, right? So if, let me just read this. I haven't looked at this code for a little while. Right. So this is looking for any profiles that would have got loaded in from my API call. If there's none, it just throws up a card telling me we didn't find anything based on what you were searching for. And if there is some stuff, it creates a list, and I map through my profiles array, right? And then here's, for each one, it throws up a new card with the data for that profile. And then I have a bunch of, you know, just utility functions. Again, these are helpers. Anything that, you know, has that obviously is an event function. And here's some styling that I threw in there. And these ones only apply to this component, at least at the moment. So I just put them in this component here. And then my render function just looks like this. So, I mean, it does a whole lot of stuff. And for, you know, 200 lines of code with lots of new lines in it, I think it's pretty reasonable. And I mean, if you're not familiar with React, it probably doesn't look that easy to read. But for me, I find it pretty easy to follow and just go with. Yeah?
Is there any way to mix Blaze templates and React components?
Yes. There's a package that allows you to basically render React components the same way you would a Blaze template. So you do a double curly brace with a bracket, and then you put your React component name. I haven't used it because I just went to pure React without Blaze, so I'm not sure how well it performs or if I would advise it. I mean, I wouldn't advise it because I like React, but you can certainly do that, absolutely.
As a follow-up to that, what does like your main layout file look like?
My main layout file.
Just like really basic, like a home page or whatever.
This is my layout file. So I'm watching my path here to just put an app title in the bar. An app title. That's this here, this bio. And then I have my route, and I'm setting up my menu items for my menu over here. That's my Sweet Movember stash. and then I have some simple helper functions here. You know, and there's my, I have two components in here, my app bar and my left nav, and then the third one is passed in with using React layout. So anything that would go in the main area here, like if I go to photos, anything in that main area is passed in with a property, and then it just renders it like that. I pass a component in with any props that that component might need, get passed in with it.
What is the app bar? Like an Angular template or something?
Pardon me?
App bar.
App bar. That's part of the Material UI library or framework. I don't even know what to call it. I should probably know that.
Angular director.
It's this. So there's app bar right there.
The analogy to an Angular directive would be a React component. Extending and modifying HTML is like the core of React currently there.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. I mean, I haven't used Angular, so I can't speak to that, but basically everything that you write in React in JSX anyway is compiled into JavaScript that creates DOM elements. It's basically abstracting all the ugly JavaScript code you'd have to write if you were going to do it in pure JS to make a layout in your DOM. Wow, this has been super long, eh? Okay, I guess we're done then. Is that good? Awesome. Thank you so much, guys.